Good morning. Looking out, what a great group we got here. It's great. I actually drove out from Brisbane this morning just to be here with you guys. I do live south of the border, but I grew up in Brisbane, so don't throw me out. I am a Queenslander. Actually, I have a fondness for Dalby because when I first joined CAP, so about 6 years ago, I had an early work trip connecting with partner churches of CAPs out in across Queensland, and I got to come out to Dalby. I caught up with Pastor Murray, with another Linda Hammond. You got a couple of wonderful Lindas here, and just had such a wonderful meeting with them. I was really just inspired by their love for the city, for the region, and the way they talked about this area. So it's been a few years, but it's wonderful to be back here with you again. As I said, I grew up in Brisbane. Maybe a bit about myself. I grew up in Brisbane. I moved to Newcastle as an 18-year-old to do some training with Youth with a Mission, YWAM. And I spent 10 years in Newcastle with YWAM. I spent another 5 years in Russia with YWAM there. And I moved back to Newcastle. And it's just a real joy to be here. I think I've always had this desire. What led me to YWAM was, I want my faith to really mean something. What brought me into CAP was I want my faith to really mean something, and so it's kind of been a theme throughout my life so far. But here I am at CAP. Been working for CAP for about 6 years. I'm part of the church partnerships team, which essentially means I spend time working with church leaders, working with churches, and kind of looking at how can we stand with the church in its mission. CAP, together with Dalby Christian Family, with many other churches right across Australia, we share this vision that in Australia, no one will face financial distress alone. It's a big vision. That's what Linda was just talking about. Being able to walk alongside people here in your community that are going through that experience of financial distress, but not doing that in isolation. Pastor Ben was talking about that loneliness epidemic, and recognizing that there's moments of financial distress, but we as the church, we don't want to see people go through that in isolation, go through that alone. Anyway, what I want to bring today is a provocation around how we as individuals and how as a church community, how we steward our resources for those in need. The Bible talks about two different narratives that we can follow. Kind of represents these differences, different narratives that we can kind of follow. But there's the narrative of the culture, of the world around us. It's a pretty, it's pretty loud. We see it everywhere we go. It's all around us, but it actually turns out to be hollow promises. On the other hand, we have the biblical story, these biblical wisdoms. And though it may be challenging at times, it's the way to life, and life in its fullness. So that's what we're going to get into today. I'm going to start by reading from Proverbs chapter 9. I'm going to read a section out of there, but actually maybe before I read that, I might pray, and then we'll read. Father God, I thank you for this day. I thank you for this time together as a community with you. And I pray just as we look into your word, that you would be speaking to each one of us individually. You'd be speaking to us as a community. You would be encouraging us. We thank you that you are for us, and in everything we can see your love shining through. And so as we dive into your word, we want to see your love shining through this morning. Amen. All right, so I'm going to read Proverbs 9. I'm going to read verse 1 to 6, and then I'm going to jump ahead and we're going to read verse 13 to 18. So feel free to follow along with me. Proverbs 9. Wisdom has built her house. She has set up its 7 pillars. She has prepared her meat and mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her servants, and she calls from the highest point of the city. Let all who are simple come to my house. To those who have no sense, she says, come, eat my food and drink the wine. Leave your simple ways and you will live. Walk in the way of insight. I'm going to go down to verse 13. Folly is an unruly woman. She is simple and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house on a seat at the highest point of the city, calling out to those who pass by, who go straight on their way. Let all who are simple come to my house. To those who have no sense, she says, stolen water is sweet. Food eaten in secret is delicious. But little do they know that the dead are there, that her guests are deep in the realm of the dead. Okay, so this may seem like a strange chapter to talk about money from, right? But in this chapter, there are 2 women that personify wisdom and folly. They can also be used to personify what I was saying before, this culture, the narrative of the culture around us, versus the biblical story, that biblical narrative and that wisdom there. You may have noticed some similarities about them. They both call out at the highest points in the city. Hey, if you want to learn, if you want to know how to live, come follow me. They're calling out. Both make claims about the good they offer. Come in, eat my food, have a drink. You know, they're both inviting others into their way of life. So the question is, who are we going to follow? You know, there's a few similarities, but there are some significant differences. Woman Wisdom's house, as I'll call her, she has 7 pillars. 7 pillars, not thinking too much about construction these days. I'm not sure what that means today, but that idea of 7 pillars is symbolic of perfection and completion. So she's got a nice house. You're thinking about who's that friend who's got a nice house? She's got a nice house. She has spiced wine. It's the good stuff she's got. It communicates this idea of expense, of extravagance, quality. You know, this idea of enjoyment. Everything about this house suggests you will know deep rest here. You will experience that joy and satisfaction. Woman Folly, well, she's unruly. She's all over the shop. She doesn't have 7 pillars. She's just on the doorstep. It talks about stolen water. Now, I don't know what stolen water is. I don't know where that comes from. But if someone's going to offer me stolen water, I'm going to say no. I'm not going to drink that. Already I'm like suspicious about that. Her food talks about being eaten in secret. It's this nondescript. It's something you hide away. Rather than satisfaction, it actually goes into a pretty dark ending in this passage. Little do they know, the guests are deep in the realm of the dead. It suggests this idea of entrapment, of deception. So the way of wisdom, this biblical narrative, is life-giving. The culture around, it's deceptive. It takes life. So I start here because it feels so pertinent to me that the culture around is making this call. It's very loud. It's selling us its view of the good life. It makes a claim about its benefits, but actually the results are empty. We see this around us. We live in an isolated and anxious society. Lots of our decisions are kind of driven by fear. This idea we need to defend ourselves. Now, I didn't read the whole chapter, but there's a verse between these two descriptions in verse 10. It says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding." Fear doesn't mean we are afraid of God, that there's something we need to defend ourselves against God from. Rather, it's this idea of respect, this reverence for God and for God's character. Wisdom starts by acknowledging our need for God, recognizing their character, that they are a generous God, that they provide, that they satisfy. See, folly is the opposite. We're doing this contrast. Folly is the opposite of that. It's the belief that we don't need God. And in that, money is so dangerous because it's saying to us, it's giving us this illusion that we don't need God. It's this false sense of security that we try to hold on to. You know, we can provide. We can meet our needs. We can be satisfied by what money can get us. But rather than finding satisfaction, we find disappointment. We end up feeling isolated. So I want to briefly look at these three prevailing mindsets of our culture. We're going to talk about these three things of consumerism, individualism, and scarcity. I think these mindsets actually impact the church more than we realize. But after that, I also want to compare these to God's story, to that biblical narrative, and looking at these values of generosity, of hospitality, and of simplicity. So let's start with consumerism. I heard recently that our primary identity used to be defined by our role in the family. You know, mother, father, son, in my case, favorite child, role in the family. But today, our primary identity is as a consumer. We're constantly being encouraged to consume, always needing more stuff. If you're feeling sad, get more stuff. Hey, if you've got something to celebrate, get more stuff. You're always being driven to get more. We also pay for stuff all the time that we don't actually have money for. Despite being some of the wealthiest people to ever walk the earth, 80% of Aussies believe they don't have enough. There's this drive, we always need more. This underlying sense of dissatisfaction. We compare ourselves with others. There's the Joneses. I'm not sure who they are, but we've got to keep up with them for some reason. It's this idea that we need to be compared somewhere, consuming something to get somewhere, and it leaves us feeling empty. My wife is American, and a couple of years ago we went as a family to visit the US. It had been quite a while since we'd been, but we were planning this big trip. At the time, we had 3 kids. I didn't say this before. I have 4 kids. It's a busy life at the moment. But at the time of this trip, we had 3 kids. They were 7, 4, and almost 2. And we deliberately chose to go before my son's 2nd birthday so that it could be cheaper. Because when they're under 2, they can sit on your lap. So we prepared ourselves for this. It's a long flight to the US. It's a long way, but we had this big holiday planned. We were going to visit friends and family. It had been quite a while, so it was something we were so looking forward to. Now, on these long-haul flights, large planes, the setup is you have 3 seats, 4 seats, and another 3 seats. So you got these sections. We, as a family of 5, had 4 seats in the middle. That was us. I was prepared for this. I knew it was going to be crowded, but I was prepared for this. 5 people, 4 seats. And we're getting settled in, and I look across the aisle, and another family's coming on, and a family of 4, and they've got 1 row of 3 and another row of 3. 4 people, 6 seats. See, we flew with Air New Zealand. Air New Zealand has this great thing on these planes, on the set of 3, you can fold the 3 seats up and turn it into like a bed for 2 people. It's a great idea. So they decided, hey, we can have 2 beds for our family of 4. And I'm sitting there looking at them, feeling pretty hard done by. When's it going to be my turn to have all this excess space, to travel in such luxury? I'm feeling a bit ticked off at these other people. They have so much disposable income. Let's just have an extra seat. I want you to know, the issue is not the other people. The issue is me. The truth is, I've had the opportunity to travel quite a lot. I was just embarking on this great holiday. I have so much to be grateful for, and here I am comparing myself with others. If only I had that. Especially we have this social media version of others, and I compare myself constantly. It leaves me unable to be satisfied with what I do have, which, like I said, it was a great holiday. And I did enjoy my holiday. I did move on from this point. Don't worry. But that comparison leaves this unquenchable desire in me for more. I need to consume more. I need to get what they have. It just won't be satisfied. I'm going to move to the next idea, individualism. If we don't believe there is a loving God providing and caring for us, we become internally focused. We put ourselves in control. If we are responsible for our happiness becomes our goal. We are only focused on ourselves. We were created to find fulfillment, to find joy in relationships, especially relationship with God. We were not made to focus on trying to compare with everyone else. But in this individualistic sense, our well-being ends up coming at the expense of others. We have to outdo them. I have to be better than someone else. We try to build our own kingdom. But the truth is, we can never replicate the abundance, the goodness of God. And again, it leaves us with this empty feeling. The third mindset, scarcity. It has been said that the first lesson of economics is scarcity. There is not enough to go around. Scarcity creates demand, and demand creates profit. See, our economic system is set up under this belief of fear. We're driven by fear. The structure of our financial markets is driven by this feeling of fear. When we dismiss the idea of a generous creator providing and actively sustaining creation, we are left with fear that there is not enough. We were singing this morning, there was a few songs I loved. It was just talking about the faithfulness of God. You are so, so good to me. And as I was thinking about that, that's not to say that I haven't had pain in my life. It's not to say that everything is easy. I can definitely think of some pretty sucky moments in life. And I think as you get older, you can sort of count them on one hand, 2 hands. It builds up. But who God is in that moment is still good. This idea of scarcity, it's creating anxiety about our current situation, fear about the future, and what will happen next. Where will the money come from? So our culture around us, it's giving this loud call, it's making some pretty bold claims. But actually, the fruit of that is dissatisfaction, anxiety, and loneliness. Leads to some pretty dark places. I don't really want to end up in those dark places, to be honest. So let's flip the script. Let's talk about biblical wisdom. Let's talk about that biblical narrative. So within this, we've got generosity. I grew up going to church, and at a young age, I noticed that almost every church, when it talks about money, it was talking about tithing. Teaching on tithing, it comes from the Old Testament, and I'm not giving a sermon on tithing today, but just very shortly, it literally means a tenth. Now, sometimes we can kind of put the Old Testament, it's like, oh, that's those old laws. We can kind of push them off to the side. We're kind of like, oh, no, don't need to really think about that. But I challenge you, behind each and every one of those laws is a principle, a value that reflects the very heart of God. And so we start to ask ourselves, how does the New Testament, how does Jesus reflect the Old Testament laws? And Jesus constantly was bringing it back to the principle. People might have asked him about murder. Well, obviously, murder's still bad. Yeah, no one's trying to pull the wool over his eyes on that one. But Jesus goes further, saying, don't even be angry. Don't carry that anger around with you. You can't love someone and hold that anger in your heart. He went further. People asked him about adultery. They said, yeah, that's a law. But let's push in a bit deeper. What are you thinking about? If you're thinking about these things, you're still going down that track. So Jesus encourages us to live way beyond the idea of these rules, these requirements, and pushed into following these values and principles. So when we think about tithing, if we put that through the same framework, I think generosity is a much deeper principle that goes beyond just this idea of tithing. And there's a lot of, again, not a sermon about tithing. Not trying to give descriptions on any of that. So generosity may look like 10%. But it also may look like a lot more than 10%. Regardless of what you give, it goes beyond a requirement, a tick box, and moves into this whole life mindset. It really leans into who we see God as. We can live a life of generosity when we know God as trustworthy. And as we were singing this morning, when we know God as faithful in who God is. See, generosity is a heart posture. It's not just about money. I'm going to introduce you to Jade. We got Jade up on the screen. Should have Jade. Jade is someone who had a job. She had a home. She had a family. She was set up in Sydney. And sadly for Jade, she experienced domestic violence. She made the difficult decision to leave that relationship. For her, it meant leaving everything behind. It meant leaving behind her home, her job. She moved away from that area, from her support network. Jade had 2 kids with her, and she moved into a refuge without any money. When she moved in there, she came into contact with a church that, like Dalby Christian Family, partners with CAP. And this church, they helped get her finances in order, but they did so much more than that. through the church care wing, they helped her get a car, and they helped her with finding a job. She was able to get a job working in a cafe. It wasn't just the practical support for Jade. And so she shared for her that experience, the emotional impact of the financial distress she was going through. She felt alone. She felt unseen, unheard, uncared for. But then she came into contact with this church community, and they listened. They sat down with her. They heard her story. They opened their hearts to her. They instilled this idea of value. Today, Jade actually manages the cafe at this church. She loves Jesus. She's so passionate about everyone having a chance to start a relationship with him. In this cafe, she makes sure to smile and to say hello to every person who comes through, because, as she says, you never know what's going on behind the scenes. That simple smile, that hello, can make that person feel seen and heard, and that was her experience. So this kind of transformation in Jade's life is only possible through generous communities, generous churches that are loving others. They're loving one another, they're loving others around them. So generosity is not just about finance. It's a heart posture that moves us towards others in a whole range of ways. We need generous churches that can come alongside others, that can walk with them, that can, help them put a budget together and also sit with them while they're piecing their life back together. I share this story. It's a story of Jade and how she lives out that generosity for others, but it's a story of the generosity of that church lived out in Jade's life as well. All right, simplicity. Just over a month ago, my kids broke our TV. There's 4 of them. Things get a bit out of hand. They were playing a game they shouldn't have. It's a bit of a frustration. End result, screen was smashed, TV's gone. It's been over a month. We've survived without a TV. I personally don't watch a whole lot of TV, but there's certain things I miss. I didn't enjoy watching Origin this past week for a couple of reasons. I had to watch it on a small screen, and other reasons as well. But you know what? I was like, I'm hoping that my kids would feel so distraught, like, oh, there's no TV. They'd really feel the weight of what they'd done. I really wanted it to sink in. And they haven't really asked, like, when are we getting a new TV? It's come up early on. It's like, oh, you'll just get a new TV. I was like, wow, doesn't always work like that. And they've just kind of moved on. There's a simplicity in our current life without this TV around. Our kids have, jumped on board. They've found other things to do. But I want to talk about this idea of simplicity as more than just a trend of minimalism. We've got to have less. It's not about having nothing just for the sake of being minimalistic. It is deliberately creating space for what really matters. With our kids, it's helped us see that opportunity of like, well, the TV can be good. We often do movie nights as a family, which is really great. But what really matters is that time as a family. I love the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus' wisdom through that comes through. But in Matthew 6, there's a number of things around simplicity that Jesus reflected. There's this thing, where your treasure is, your heart will be also. Do not worry. God knows your needs. And it finishes in verse 33. It says, seek first his kingdom and righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Simplicity isn't this idea of you've got to get rid of all your stuff. Biblical wisdom shows it's creating space for what really matters. Finding contentment in what God has provided. And I move to the third mindset here, hospitality. Now, people find themselves in financial distress for a whole array of complex reasons. Social services are not easy to engage with, and people feel overwhelmed in these experiences. People lack financial education on budgeting and many other systems. And sometimes it's just personal habits. However, one of the single biggest issues in social cohesion and connection is this idea of having someone with you. That access to community. Giving someone a budget helps, but what really helps is then giving them a community of people who care for them. As CAP, we received funding in the last year from an organization that has never provided funding for faith-based organizations before. So, how did Christians Against Poverty manage to do that? Well, we lied, obviously, right? No, we were very clear about what our content is, that it's deeply biblical, and that our process is outworked through the church. So we don't embrace any sort of stipulations around, well, this is what you can and can't do with CAP. We hold on to those biblical values. And they said yes to us because I think they saw the potential in the church that sometimes we as a church miss. You know, there are approximately 11,000 churches across Australia. Over half of them have some kind of care ministry, some way that they are helping their community. That's, almost 6,000 churches across Australia that are doing something deliberate. They've got some sort of engagement with their community to care for those in need. The church can provide community like no other. So learning to be hospitable, to have open hearts and open homes, I believe is what will transform our nation, transform the communities around us. The biblical wisdom of loving your neighbor is repeated constantly throughout Scripture. And it really shines through in acts of hospitality. I'm going to read from 1 Peter chapter 4. Just to kind of highlight this. But it's constantly throughout the Bible. Love your neighbor, all these things. This idea of hospitality. I'm going to read 1 Peter 4, verses 8 through to 10. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. Hospitality is not just serving morning tea after church, though that's part of it. It's not just entertaining people in your home. That can be part of it too. It's hospitality, it's an intentional movement towards others, towards those on the outside. Often when there's studies of cultures, the righteousness of a culture is summed up by the quality of justice in the culture. And the quality of justice in a culture is judged by how the weakest and most vulnerable people are looked after. I think these are really important values to be reflecting on. I think the church has separated at times the spiritual from the material. When we think about the physical money, possessions, things that we have, we tend to think of that as just a material thing. But the biblical narrative here that's talking about generosity, simplicity, hospitality is outworked with the physical. If we want to live as disciples, it means living out these practical ways of these practical biblical wisdoms. A lot of our decisions we make daily involve money and possessions. Just very practically, every day we're going through these small decisions, sometimes very large decisions. If we want to live as true disciples, we need to have a framework for making biblical decisions about these practical things. Following these deep biblical wisdoms of generosity, of simplicity, of hospitality in the world we live in. Thinking about these things is one of the keys to being a disciple, thinking about how we outwork this. And it's ensuring that we invest our lives for a return that truly matters. CAP exists to stand with the church in living out its mission, to stand with the church in wrestling with these ideas of generosity, simplicity, hospitality. That starts at an individual level for each one of us. It's not something we've got to go out there and tell everyone else how to do. That's for us. When I talked about 80% of Australians live thinking they don't have enough, they need more, that's us here today. So it's something we personally need to wrestle with. And so CAP, we operate in this space of how do we support the church with that. But then the outworking of that as well is reflected in how we live that out with others. And so here at Dalby Christian Family, there's already a handful of people that have kind of gone through some of that training around how to walk alongside someone in the midst of their financial distress. And so I encourage you, this is something as a church you guys are doing. And it's quite incredible. And it's an opportunity as well for you to kind of look at how you can get involved in that more. But thinking at a personal level, where do we begin? So CAP has created some resources for you. We've called this Good Yields. It's about learning to yield to God for the good of others. So you will have seen there's cards on your seat. There's some info on the screen here. So it has some resources to help you with this. How do we think and act with our money? Feel free if you want, you can scan while I'm talking. If you want to take that card with you, or if you want to grab it off the screen to be able to access those resources. But in those resources, there's 3 things that we've created that you can download today. There's an individual reflection guide, so it helps you think through what yielding to God looks like for you personally. There are a set of devotion cards. It includes prompts for actions and things you can do. As well, there are conversation cards, so for families, so you can talk and pray about this together as a family. How do these values get lived out for the whole family? I share these resources, as I said, because it's something that I want to start with us. It's not something that we've got to say, oh, we've got to fix something out there. We're talking about these values because these are values for us. This biblical narrative that we've been talking through. It's for us to choose and to walk into each and every day. So as we finish off, I'm going to maybe just give a few moments for you to reflect. I want you to ask yourselves, where are my decisions based? Are they driven by fear? By some of these things of the culture around? Or are they directed by my trust in a loving God, in who God is. How can I be living out generosity, hospitality, or simplicity as I trust God? So I give you a few moments to reflect, and I'll pray, and we'll wrap up from there. Oh God, I just want to start by saying what a faithful God you are. As we sang this morning, you are faithful. You are always faithful. You are so, so good. And as we wrestle with some of these questions, the practical implication might be that we don't have much money. We don't have many physical possessions, and things are difficult at the moment. But I put my trust in you, God. I say, at any point, you are faithful. When I feel like things are real tight, God, you are faithful. When I feel like things are going well, God, you are faithful. You are a good God. You're a loving God. And as we reflect on these things, God, I pray that you would be moving in my heart, moving in the hearts of all of us here, to really wrestle with this idea of generosity, these ideas of simplicity, of hospitality. How can I live out this biblical narrative that has transformed my life? How can I live that out in a way that reflects on the community around me? Lord, we invite you to speak. We invite you to speak. We invite you to be moving in our lives after Sunday, Monday through Friday, when we're making these small decisions about the practical things, that you are there with us also. Lord, we pray for Linda and for the team here as they serve the community, as they walk alongside others, as they connect with those around them, and bring that whole life transformation that comes only from you, Jesus. But it starts with a moment of smiling and saying hello, reaching out, looking outwards. So I pray for the team, Lord, here, that you would be blessing them, moving through them, and for the whole church that is part of that ministry. Because it's not just individuals, but it's you, God, moving through this community together, living as a generous church together. So I pray, Lord, that your hand would be upon them as you move through them, God. Pray this in your mighty name, Jesus.